I don't tell people this story often. When I do, they look at me like I'm crazy, or lying, or both. But I know what I saw that night, and I know what it meant, even if I can't explain how or why it happened. It was November, my junior year of college, and I was driving back to campus after Thanksgiving break. I'd spent 4 days at home eating my mom's cooking and sleeping in my old bed, and as much as I loved being home, I was ready to get back. I'd left around 7 in the evening, later than I should have, because my mom kept insisting I take more leftovers, and my little sister wanted to show me one more thing on her phone. By the time I actually got on the road, it was already dark. The drive was about 2.5 hours, mostly highway with a stretch of back roads through the mountains near the end. I knew the route well enough that I could do it half asleep, which was good because I was pretty tired. I had a playlist going, some energy drink in the cup holder, and I was making decent time. The roads were mostly empty, just the occasional set of headlights passing in the opposite direction. I was about 40 minutes from campus on one of those winding mountain roads where the trees press in close on both sides and your high beams only show you about 50 feet ahead when I saw it. Smoke, rising from somewhere off the right side of the road. My first thought was maybe someone was camping, but it was too thick for a campfire and the location was wrong. Then my headlights caught the reflective markers on the guardrail, or where the guardrail should have been. There was a huge gap, the metal twisted and torn like something had punched through it. I slowed down immediately and pulled over onto the shoulder, my hazards on. I could see it now, about 20 feet down the embankment. A car flipped over on its roof, smoke pouring from the engine. The driver's side was crumpled pretty badly and I couldn't see any movement from inside. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called 911, already getting out of my car. The dispatcher answered and I told her there'd been an accident, gave her the approximate location, said I was going down to check for survivors. She told me to be careful, that help was on the way, but I barely heard her. I was already half sliding down the embankment, using trees to keep my balance. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. The car was a Honda Civic, dark blue, and even in the dim light from my phone's flashlight, I could see details that made my stomach drop. There was a dent in the back left panel, the same dent I'd gotten last year when I backed into a pole at the grocery store. There was a row of stickers on the back window, band logos, and a parking permit from my school. The license plate frame said, "Powered by coffee and bad decisions," the same ironic frame my roommate Jake had bought me as a joke. It was my car. I was looking at my own car, crushed and smoking at the bottom of this embankment. I stopped moving, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. That was impossible. My car was parked up on the road. I'd just gotten out of it. This had to be another car that just happened to look similar, a weird coincidence. Except I could see my exact stickers, my exact dent, and when I got close enough to see the license plate, the numbers made my blood run cold. It was my plate. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and fell into the leaves. I bent down to grab it, and that's when I heard voices, muffled, coming from inside the overturned car. I forced myself to move closer, to crouch down and look through the shattered driver's side window. There were 3 people inside, hanging upside down in their seatbelts. The driver's face was turned toward me, blood running from his nose and mouth. It was me. I was looking at my own face, my own body, trapped and broken in this wreck. In the passenger seat was Jake, my roommate, his head tilted at an angle that made me want to throw up. And in the back seat was Marissa, a girl from my psych class that I'd been flirting with for weeks. The driver, the other me, opened his eyes. They were glassy and unfocused, but they found mine in the darkness. His lips moved, and I heard a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't, distorted and far away like it was coming through water. "Don't drive tonight. Please, don't drive tonight." I scrambled backward, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating or dreaming or having some kind of breakdown. I turned and tried to climb back up the embankment, but my legs wouldn't work right. Everything felt slow and heavy, like moving through honey. The smoke from the car was getting thicker, and I could smell gasoline, sharp and chemical. "Tyler," another voice called from the wreck. Jake's voice. "Turn around. You have to turn around." I didn't turn around. I kept climbing, pulling myself up using roots and rocks and anything I could grab. My lungs burned and my vision was starting to blur. The sound of sirens filled the air, getting closer, but they sounded wrong, distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. And then, nothing. I woke up in my car, still parked on the shoulder of the road, my hazards blinking. My phone was in my lap, the 911 call still connected, the dispatcher's voice calling my name through the speaker. I grabbed it, confused and disoriented. "I'm here," I managed to say. "I'm sorry, What happened?" "Sir, you called about an accident but then stopped responding. Are you all right? Did you witness a crash?" I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It read 9:47. The last time I had checked before I pulled over, it had been 9:15. I'd lost 32 minutes somehow. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I saw something, but I don't know." The dispatcher kept me on the line asking questions I couldn't answer until I heard more sirens approaching. Real ones this time, getting closer from behind me. I turned to look and saw fire trucks and ambulances racing past me, heading in the direction I'd been traveling. They disappeared around the next bend in the road. The dispatcher heard them too. "Sir, it sounds like emergency services are in your area. Are you sure you're all right? Do you need medical attention?" No, I'm fine. I think I maybe fell asleep for a second. I'm going to pull into the next rest stop and take a break." I hung up before she could respond and just sat there, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't understand what had just happened, but every instinct I had was screaming at me not to drive any further, to turn around, to go back home. But that was crazy. I was fine. My car was fine. It had just been a weird dream or something. I sat there for 10 more minutes trying to decide what to do. Finally, I put the car in drive and continued forward slowly. After about 3 miles, I saw the lights, red and blue and white strobing across the trees. There were police cars and fire trucks blocking most of the road, directing traffic into a single lane. As I crept past, I saw it. A car, flipped on its roof, being surrounded by emergency workers. A dark blue Honda Civic, the same model as mine. There was a massive gap in the guardrail where it had gone through, and I could see the path it had carved down the embankment. The exact spot where I'd seen the wreck in my vision or dream, or whatever it had been. An officer was directing traffic, waving cars through. As I passed, moving at barely 5 miles per hour, I got a clear look at the license plate on the overturned car. It wasn't mine. Different numbers, different state, but everything else was identical. Same color, same model, same year. There was even a dent in the back left panel. I made it back to campus in a daze. I parked in my usual spot and sat there for a long time, just staring at nothing. Eventually, I went up to my room. Jake was there, playing video games with his headphones on. Alive. Fine. He waved at me when I came in, and I waved back, my throat too tight to speak. The next day, I checked the local news. There had been a fatal accident on that mountain road the previous night, around 9:45 p.m. A Honda Civic had missed a curve and gone through the guardrail. The driver, a 21-year-old college student, had died at the scene. 2 passengers were in critical condition. I never found out what their names were. I didn't want to know, but I think about them constantly. I think about that other version of me hanging upside down in the wreckage, using his last breath to warn me, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't pulled over when I did, if I hadn't lost those 32 minutes somehow. Would it have been me in that wreck instead? Would the timing have been just different enough to put me on that curve at the exact wrong moment? I don't drive that road anymore. I take the long way now, even though it adds an hour to the trip. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if somewhere out there there's another version of me who didn't get the warning. Another Tyler who kept driving, who died on that mountain road, who never made it home. And I wonder if maybe, in some reality I can't see or understand, that version of me is trying to warn someone else, passing along the message that saved my life. Don't drive tonight. 3 words that mean everything.
I've always been a cautious person. My mom raised me that way, always telling me to check my surroundings, lock my doors, trust my instincts. So when I noticed the white van behind me that night, I didn't brush it off. I paid attention. It was late October, around 11:30 at night, and I was driving home from my college roommate's wedding reception in Flagstaff. The celebration had gone longer than expected, and I'd stupidly worn heels that were killing my feet. So all I wanted was to get home, crawl into bed, and sleep for 12 hours. The highway was mostly empty, just me and the occasional semi-truck. That's why the van stood out so much when it appeared in my rearview mirror. It was old, probably from the 90s, that dingy white color that's more gray than anything else. No windows on the sides, just the kind of vehicle that makes you think of kidnappings and true crime podcasts. It merged onto the highway behind me about 10 miles outside of Flagstaff, and at first I didn't think much of it. But then I took my exit towards Sedona, and so did the van. Still, coincidence, right? Plenty of people live out that way. I turned left at the light, heading toward the residential area. The van turned left. I took a right on Juniper Road, a street I didn't even need to take, just testing. The van took the same right, maintaining the exact same distance behind me, maybe 3 car lengths back. My hands started sweating on the steering wheel. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mom's voice in my head was making me see threats that weren't there, but my gut was screaming something different. I sped up, pushing 15 over the limit on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. The van sped up too, matching my pace exactly. Its headlights were strange, flickering on and off every few seconds like there was a loose connection somewhere. In the sporadic darkness between flickers, I couldn't even tell if anyone was driving it. The windshield just looked black and empty. My phone was in the cup holder, and I thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would I even call? The police? And say what? That a van was behind me on a public road? I wasn't in immediate danger. At least that's what I kept telling myself, even as my heart hammered against my ribs and my breath came faster. I tried another test. I turned onto Mesa Drive, which loops back toward the main road, but takes you through an area with almost no streetlights. It's the kind of road you'd only take if you knew exactly where you were going. The van followed. Every single turn, every speed change, every time I slowed down or sped up, the van mirrored me perfectly, like it was tethered to my car by an invisible rope. 30 minutes. That's how long this went on. 30 minutes of turns and backtracking, and my mind spiraling into every worst-case scenario. I thought about those stories you hear about traffickers who follow women home, or predators who wait for you to park in your driveway before they strike. I couldn't go home. I absolutely could not lead this thing to my apartment. That's when I saw the diner, Rosie's, a 24-hour place that caters to truckers and insomniacs. The parking lot was mostly full, lights blazing through the windows, people visible inside eating pie and drinking coffee. Safety. Witnesses. I jerked the wheel and pulled into the lot faster than I should have, my tires squealing slightly as I parked right in front of the main entrance under the brightest light I could find. The van didn't follow me into the lot. Instead, it rolled past the entrance and stopped across the street, just sitting there in the shadows between street lamps. The engine was running, I could see the faint exhaust in the cold air, but the headlights were off now. It was just waiting, watching. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm and professional, asking me questions I could barely focus on answering. Where was I? What did the van look like? Did I see the license plate? Was I in immediate danger? I told her everything, my words tumbling over each other. She said officers were on their way and to stay inside the diner until they arrived. I went inside, and the warmth and noise of the place felt surreal after the silent terror of the drive. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and sat in a booth by the window where I could watch my car and the street beyond it. The van was still there, still idling, still waiting. Other customers glanced at me occasionally, probably wondering why I looked so rattled, but no one said anything. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights off but clearly official. I practically ran outside to meet them. A female officer and her male partner stepped out, and I started explaining everything immediately, pointing across the street to where the van had been parked. Except it wasn't there anymore. The street was empty, just pavement and shadows and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. It was right there, I insisted, pointing. I swear it was right there for the last 20 minutes. It followed me for over a half hour before I stopped here. The officers exchanged a glance, and I could see the skepticism even though they were trying to hide it. The male officer walked across the street to look around, while the female officer took my statement, writing everything down in her notepad. When her partner came back, he just shook his head. Nothing over there. No tire marks, no van in the area. Maybe it left when it saw us coming, the female officer suggested, trying to be kind. She looked tired, like she'd dealt with a lot of paranoid people making calls about nothing. Can you check the security cameras? I asked, gesturing to the diner. They have cameras in the parking lot. You'll see it on the footage. You'll see I'm not making this up. The officer nodded and went inside to speak with the night manager. I stood there with her partner, hugging myself against the cold, feeling humiliated and terrified in equal measure. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the stress and the long day and the dark roads had made me see something that wasn't there. 10 minutes later, the female officer came back outside. Her expression had changed. She looked confused, maybe even a little unsettled. We reviewed the footage from the last hour. We can see you pulling into the parking lot. We can see you sitting in the booth by the window. But there's no van, Megan. Not in the lot. Not across the street. Nothing. That's impossible, I whispered. She showed me her phone. The security footage paused on a frame that showed my car in the parking lot, my headlights reflecting clearly in the diner's windows. The street beyond was empty. She scrolled forward, frame by frame, through the entire 20 minutes I'd been inside. Nothing ever appeared. Your car's headlights are visible in the reflection, she pointed out. If another vehicle had been across the street with its lights on, we'd see it. But there's nothing there. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. I'd watched that van. I'd seen it sitting there, its exhaust visible in the cold air. It had been real. Do you want us to follow you home? The male officer asked gently. Make sure you get there safely. I nodded, not trusting my voice. They escorted me back to my apartment, staying behind me the entire drive. I checked my rearview mirror obsessively the whole way, but there was nothing there. except the police cruiser's headlights. When I got home, they waited until I was inside and had locked the door before they left. I stood in my dark apartment, still wearing my bridesmaid's dress and those stupid heels, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through the photos from earlier that night, pictures from the wedding reception, shots of me and friends laughing and dancing, and then I found one I didn't remember taking. It was from my car, taken at some point during the drive. The angle was from my front seat, pointed at the rearview mirror, and in the reflection, barely visible in the darkness, was that white van. But it wasn't the van that made my blood run cold. It was what I could finally see through the windshield. There was no driver. The front seat was completely empty, and in the back window, barely distinguishable from the shadows, was a pale face pressed against the glass, watching me with eyes that didn't reflect any light at all. The timestamp on the photo was from 20 minutes before I'd pulled into the diner, which meant whatever was following me hadn't left when I stopped. It had never been across the street at all.
I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I'd heard the stories, like everyone else, seen the movies. But when you spend most of your nights alone on empty highways delivering packages, you learn to separate reality from your mind playing tricks on you. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. It was a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning, around 2 a.m. I'd just finished my last delivery in Wickenburg and was heading back to Phoenix on Route 93. The stretch between those 2 points is about as desolate as it gets. Nothing but flat desert, the occasional cactus silhouette, and darkness so thick it feels like you're driving through tar. I'd done this route 100 times before. It was monotonous, sure, but I had grown comfortable with the solitude. The hum of the engine, the white noise of tires on asphalt, the glow of my dashboard. It was meditative in a way. I remember adjusting my rearview mirror about 15 miles out. Just habit, you know. Checking the back seat, making sure nothing shifted during the drive. That's when I saw her, just for a second. A woman sitting in the back seat, her face pale and expressionless, long black hair hanging down past her shoulders. My heart jumped into my throat and I jerked the wheels slightly, my eyes snapping back to the mirror. Nothing. The back seat was empty, just the usual clutter. A couple of empty water bottles, my jacket wadded up against the door. I laughed it off, told myself I was tired, that my brain was filling in shadows with familiar shapes. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight. Of course I was seeing things. I turned up the radio, some late-night talk show discussing conspiracy theories, and tried to focus on the road ahead. But every few minutes, almost against my will, my eyes would drift back to that mirror, and the back seat remained empty. For a while. About 10 miles later, I glanced again, and she was back. Closer this time, sitting directly behind the passenger seat, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, those hollow eyes staring straight ahead, not at me, just staring. I slammed on the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked up and cut into my chest. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of the highway, dust kicking up around me. I sat there breathing hard, my hands shaking on the wheel. Slowly, I turned around to look at the back seat with my own eyes, not through the mirror. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I got out of the car. The desert air was cold, that dry, biting cold that seeps into your bones. I opened the back door, checked under the seats, even popped the trunk. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stood there in the middle of that empty highway, feeling like an idiot,
listening to the sound of my own breathing and the distant howl of wind across the flats. I got back in, locked the doors, and kept driving. What else could I do? But it didn't stop. Every few miles, when I checked the mirror, she was there. And each time, she was closer. Fourth time I looked, she was leaning forward, her face now visible between the front seats. Her skin was gray, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black, like someone had scooped out the pupils and irises and left only void. Her mouth hung open slightly, and I could see her chest rising and falling, like she was breathing. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic breathing sound coming through the back vents of the car. In and out. In and out. Slow and deliberate. I cranked the heat off, thinking maybe it was just air pressure or something mechanical, but the breathing continued. I tried turning up the radio to drown it out, but the station started crackling with interference. The talk show host's voice cut in and out, and underneath it, I could hear something else. Whispers. Faint at first, but growing louder. I couldn't make out words exactly, but the tone was wrong. Urgent and angry and desperate all at once. I punched the radio off entirely and drove in silence, except for that breathing. I started talking to myself, just to hear my own voice, telling myself I was fine, that I was almost to the gas station at the junction, that I just needed to hold it together for another 20 minutes. But when I looked in the mirror again, she was right behind me now, her face inches from the back of my headrest. Her hair was draped over the seat, and I swear I could feel cold air on the back of my neck, like someone exhaling directly onto my skin. I don't remember much of the next 15 miles. I know I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I know I was crying, though I didn't realize it until I tasted salt on my lips. I know I didn't look in the mirror again. I couldn't. I just stared straight ahead at the broken white lines of the highway and drove. When the lights of the gas station finally appeared on the horizon, I have never felt more relief in my entire life. I pulled into the lot way too fast, barely missing one of the pumps, and slammed the car into park. The lights were buzzing, that fluorescent hum that sounds almost like screaming if you listen too close. But it was civilization. It was people. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak, and headed for the building. The clerk was an older guy, maybe 60, with a thick gray beard and tired eyes. He was standing behind the counter when I walked in, but as soon as he saw me, his expression changed. He looked past me, out towards my car, and his face went pale. He took a step back, shaking his head. "You need to leave," he said quietly. I stared at him, confused. "What? I just need to use the bathroom, man. I just need a minute." "Not you," he said, his eyes still fixed on my car. "What you brought with you. You came down 93, didn't you, from the stretch past Wickenburg?" I nodded slowly, my stomach dropping. "You need to leave," he repeated, firmer this time. "I'm not coming near that car, and you shouldn't get back in it." I looked back at my vehicle. In the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, I could see the back window, and there, pressed against the glass from the inside, was a handprint. Small, pale, with fingers too long to be human. I never got back in that car. I called my supervisor, told him I quit, and hitched a ride with a trucker heading east. I don't know what happened to the car after that. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I hear it. That soft, rhythmic breathing, in and out, coming from somewhere I can't see. And I know she's still waiting, somewhere in the dark, for me to look back one more time. I've been driving trucks for 23 years now, and I've seen just about everything you can see from behind a windshield. Sunrises over the Rockies that'd make you believe in God. Accidents that'd make you stop believing. And enough miles of empty road to fill a lifetime. But there's one night I can't explain. One passenger I can't forget, no matter how hard I try to rationalize it away. It was early March, 5 years ago now, and I was hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Boise down to northern Nevada. The weather had turned nasty about an hour into the drive. One of those spring storms that comes out of nowhere and dumps rain like the sky's got a personal grudge. My wipers were working overtime, barely keeping up, and visibility was maybe 30 feet, if I was lucky. I was already behind schedule, so I kept going, white-knuckling it through sheets of rain on Highway 95. That's when I saw her. Just a figure on the side of the road at first, illuminated for a second in my headlights. A woman, soaked to the bone, waving her arms. My first instinct was to keep driving. You don't pick up hitchhikers anymore, not at 1 a.m. in the middle of a storm. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was because she looked so desperate, or maybe it was because I remembered what my mother used to say about helping people when they need it most. I pulled over onto the shoulder and hit my flashers. She came running up to the passenger side, her hair plastered to her face, wearing a thin cotton dress that was completely inadequate for the weather. I leaned over and opened the door, and she climbed in, bringing the smell of rain and wet earth with her. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and breathless. "Thank you so much. I thought no one was going to stop." "What are you doing out here in this weather? Car breakdown?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. She was shivering violently. "A few miles back. I've been walking for an hour." I grabbed the spare jacket from behind my seat and handed it to her. She took it gratefully and pulled it around her shoulders. In the dim light of the cab, I could see she was young, maybe early 20s, with delicate features and dark eyes that seemed older than her face. "I'm Robert," I said, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "Lila," she replied. "My name's Lila." "Where are you headed, Lila?" "There's a small town about 15 miles up the road. Copper Springs. I live there." We drove in silence for a while. The rain continued its assault on the windshield, and the rhythmic thump of the wipers was hypnotic. Lila sat quietly, staring out the window at the darkness. She wasn't looking at her phone or fidgeting or doing any of the things people usually do. She just sat there, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. "You got family in Copper Springs, Lila?" "I did," she said softly. "Once." I work 12-hour shifts at the hospital, sometimes back-to-back when we're short-staffed, which is basically always. By the time I'm done, I'm running on fumes and muscle memory. That's my only excuse for what happened that night, though even now I'm not sure an excuse covers it. It was a Thursday, or maybe it had rolled over into Friday by then. I just finished my second consecutive night shift in the ICU. 16 hours of code blues and grieving families, and the particular kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones. All I wanted was to get home, take a scalding shower, and sleep for 10 hours straight. The drive from the hospital to my apartment was about 40 minutes, most of it on State Route 18, a 2-lane highway that cuts through farmland and forest with almost no lighting. I knew I was going too fast. The speedometer read 73 in a 55, but the road was empty and my body was screaming for my bed. I'd made this drive hundreds of times, knew every curve and dip, and I let my foot get heavy on the gas pedal. That's when I saw the lights in my rearview mirror. Red and blue, unmistakable, flashing in the darkness behind me. My heart sank. A speeding ticket was the last thing I needed, especially after the shift I'd just had. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and waited with my hands visible on the steering wheel like you're supposed to. Through my side mirror, I watched the patrol car pull up behind me, a classic black and white with the state police markings. The headlights were bright enough that I couldn't see the officer when he got out, just a tall silhouette walking toward my window. I rolled it down as he approached. He was a big guy, probably 6'3" or 6'4", wearing the standard uniform with a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. What I could see clearly were his sunglasses, mirrored aviators that reflected my own tired face back at me. Sunglasses. At 2 in the morning. I remember thinking that was odd, but I was too exhausted to really process it. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. His voice was polite, but had a strange quality to it, almost flat, like he was reading from a script. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "I was speeding. I'm sorry, officer. I just got off a double shift at the hospital and I wasn't paying attention to my speed." He nodded slowly. "License and registration, please." I fumbled for my purse and pulled out my license with shaking hands. The adrenaline was starting to cut through my exhaustion now. I handed it to him along with my registration from the glove box. He took them without a word and shined his flashlight into my car, moving the beam slowly across the back seat and passenger side. The light was incredibly bright, almost painfully so, and I had to squint against it. "You work at County General?" he asked, the light still roaming through my car. "Yes, sir. I am a nurse in the ICU." "Long hours," he said, and there was something in his tone I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe? Or something else. "You must see a lot of people pass through." "I do," I said, unsure where this was going. He finally turned off the flashlight and looked down at my license, studying it for what felt like too long. I couldn't see his eyes behind those mirrored glasses, just the reflection of my dashboard lights and my own pale, tired face. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. "I'm going to let you off with a warning tonight, but I need you to do something for me." "Of course, officer. Thank you." "Slow down on this road," and his voice had changed somehow, become more urgent, especially near mile marker 47. "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, I will, I promise." Good. He handed back my registration, but kept my license in his hand. "Drive safe, ma'am, and remember what I said about mile marker 47. "I will, thank you again." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed oddly old-fashioned and walked back to his patrol car. I waited for him to pull out first, watching in my rearview mirror as his headlights blazed behind me. But he just sat there, idling. After a minute, I carefully pulled back onto the highway and continued home, keeping my speed at exactly 55. When I glanced in the mirror a few seconds later, his lights were gone. Just darkness behind me, like he'd vanished. I made it home without incident, parked in my usual spot, and dragged myself upstairs. It wasn't until I was standing in my bathroom, about to get in the shower, that I realized my license was still missing. He'd never given it back. I checked my purse 3 times, went back down to search my car, even looked through my pockets, even though I knew I hadn't put it there. Nothing. I was frustrated but too tired to do anything about it right then. I'd have to go to the police station in the morning to retrieve it. It happened, I told myself. Officers are human, they forget things. I showered, fell into bed, and slept like the dead. When I woke that afternoon, I drove to the state police barracks on the east side of town. It was a small building, just a few offices and a reception area. The officer at the front desk was a young guy, maybe late 20s, with a friendly face and a name tag that read, Officer Martinez. "Help you?" he asked. "Hi, yeah, I got pulled over last night on Route 18, and the officer forgot to give me back my license. I was hoping I could pick it up." He pulled up something on his computer. "What time were you pulled over?" "Around 2, maybe 2:15? He frowned at his screen, clicking through a few things. "And where on Route 18? "I'm not exactly sure of the mile marker. Somewhere in the middle stretch, I think." The officer was really tall, wearing mirrored aviators. He was driving a standard patrol car. Officer Martinez's fingers paused on the keyboard. He looked up at me, and his expression had changed. "Mirrored sunglasses? At night?" "Yeah, I thought that was weird too." "Can you describe him more? What he looked like, what he said?" I described the encounter as best I could, including the specific warning about mile marker 47. With each detail, Officer Martinez's face grew paler. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. "Ma'am, I need you to wait here just for a minute, okay?" He disappeared into a back office. I could hear low voices, urgent conversation. A few minutes later, he came back with an older officer, a sergeant with gray hair and deep-set eyes that had seen too much. "Miss, I'm Sergeant Howell. Can you tell me again exactly what happened last night?" I repeated the story, feeling increasingly uneasy. Both officers were watching me with expressions that made my stomach twist. When I finished, Sergeant Howell opened the folder he'd been carrying and pulled out a photograph. It was an official portrait, the kind they take for department records. "Is this the man who pulled you over?" I looked at the photo. It was definitely him. The same tall frame, the same sharp features. Even in the photo, he was wearing those mirrored aviators. "Yes, that's him." The sergeant and Officer Martinez exchanged a long look. Finally, Sergeant Howell spoke, his voice careful and measured. "Ma'am, that's Trooper James Callahan. He was a state highway patrolman who worked Route 18 for 15 years. "Okay," I said slowly. "Can I get my license from him?" "That's not possible," the sergeant said quietly. Trooper Callahan died in 1996. He was killed in the line of duty during a traffic stop. The driver he had pulled over survived. Callahan didn't. The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible. I just saw him last night. He pulled me over. We talked." "Where did he die?" Officer Martinez asked his sergeant, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Mile marker 47, Sergeant Howell said, never taking his eyes off me. "Head-on collision with a drunk driver during a traffic stop. The driver he had pulled over survived. Callahan didn't." My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, but I talked to him. He was solid, real. He had my license. Sergeant Howell closed the folder. "You're not the first person to report this, though it's been a few years since the last incident. Always the same description, always near mile marker 47, always the same warning." "I don't understand." "Neither do we. But whatever you encountered last night, it wasn't a living person. And if I were you, I'd take his warning seriously." Every single person who has reported seeing Trooper Callahan and ignored what he said has had an accident near that mile marker within a week. Some walked away, some didn't. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When I got to my apartment, I went straight to my purse and dumped everything out on my kitchen table. And there, somehow, was my license. Sitting there, right on top of my wallet, exactly where I had looked a dozen times and found nothing. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It looked normal, felt normal, except for one thing. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, was a small smudge that looked like a fingerprint, and when I held it up to the light, I could swear that fingerprint was burned into the plastic, like someone had touched it while they were holding something incredibly hot. I still drive Route 18 to get to work. I don't have another